Secondly, he lived it. You know, he went to the cross for people who murdered him, who killed him. Thirdly, is the rest of this section here, especially verses 35 and 36, which I want to talk about a little bit in a few minutes. But let's break this down a little bit. But I say to you who hear, verse 27, love your enemies. That's what he tells us. That's what he expects of us. That's what he did. That's what he expects of those who follow him. How do we do that? And fortunately, Jesus gives us some very applicable ways on how to do that. In fact, the rest of the section tells us in very concrete terms, how do we love those who are our enemies? I don't think we have to be real creative to figure out who our enemies are. It can range quite a bit. It essentially means everybody, I suppose. Who are you supposed to love? You're supposed to love everybody, including those who don't like you. So let's look at this a little bit. 27, how do we do this? By doing good to those who hate you. Okay? What's 28 say?
Bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you.
Okay. So we've got three real concrete ways of how we can love our enemies: by doing good to those who hate us, by blessing those who curse us. Now, we don't really have blessings and cursing so much these days, at least in this part of the world. We don't pronounce curses on each other. But, I'm not sure it's necessarily a good application, but, you know, not cussing out those who cuss us out, or, you know, however we could spin that. To pray for those who abuse you. That's probably the best place to start. You know, with people who we don't get along with people who hate us, with people who we struggle with pure enemies, how do we begin this process of loving them? By praying for them. You know, and not for an instant do I believe or think that in most cases that we have a switch that we can flip saying, here's somebody that either I dislike or hate, and even though we're not supposed to be doing that, but how do we move from this kind of human reaction to this Jesus-like love for people? I don't think in most cases it's a switch that's flipped. I mean, it might be in some people's cases, but I think it's a process of learning to love people who often aren't lovable or who don't love us in return. How do we do that? By small steps, by praying for them. As we pray for them, there are times when doors are open to do good to them, to begin to live out ways of loving those people who hate us. And there are times when we may never have an opportunity to do good, a physical good to someone who dislikes us, but we can be praying for them. We cannot return their hatred for hatred. You know, and this isn't, the neat thing about this is Jesus' loving of his enemies is an active thing. It's not just like a put up with it mentality. It's not, okay, if somebody flips you the bird, you flip them the bird back when you're driving, or somebody cusses you out, you just don't cuss them out, at least verbally. Maybe you do it in your head, but you don't do it verbally. But Jesus' love here is an active love. It's a much deeper than, let's just tolerate it and not lash out. It's an active love, doing an outward thing for someone who isn't going to show it back. So doing, well, yeah.
I want to say something.
Yeah.
Because it pertains so much, and I just wanted to kind of give my experience. I've been, when you say, like, for people that fly into the towers, I can almost pray for them because they're not affecting me personally.
Yeah.
I have a family member there.
Sure.
I mean, we all feel it and do whatever, but when it's more personal, we've just had some stuff going on lately that affects me personally. And I have been kind of taking it on the cheek for many years, loving and loving and loving. And then something happened where this person was like, you know, kind of saying some things, and I'm thinking I'm being loving and taking it on the cheek, right? And so then it's like, then it gets a whole lot harder to be loving. And so you talk a little bit and do whatever. But then I said to myself, you're supposed to pray for them. So I started praying, and that is harder. And I wish that people knew, like, how, if you do that, if you have done it, you are really trying to love those people who do not love you.
Yeah.
And you're trying so hard at that relationship, and it hurts. And but I'm just hoping that God somehow opens and changes that door for a healthier relationship between us and everyone. But until then, you do what you have to do, and you may have those feelings, but you just keep doing it. And even in my praying, I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm doing it, God.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just did it. So
Yeah.
pray for me that I just keep doing it.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, yeah, you're right on, Renee. I mean, I've found myself in similar situations where that it's the hardest thing is to pray for someone else when you've been hurt or when they've hurt you, and there's really nothing else you can do but pray, and even that is not an easy thing to do, and it's oftentimes something what we don't want to do, and that's why I think this is a process of learning how to do that and allow Jesus to working in our lives to allow us to do that. And I think He does, and He can, and He will. And I think, we'll go ahead and skip to kind of the end here because, you've hit I think, an issue on the head, Renee, is it hurts. It's difficult to do so. Unless we're kind of going to skip over this middle part. The middle part just elaborates a little bit more on what Jesus is saying, and perhaps another time we'll come back to it. But I think we're just going to skip to the end here. And the issue is, I think that underlies this is what Renee had talked about. Is how are we able to do this? Not physically how, we talked about that, doing good, blessing, but how emotionally, spiritually are we able to cope with issues like this? And it gets to verse 35 and 36. Somebody else read that. If somebody with the NIV or something else, read 35 and 36, please.
But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as Father is merciful.
Okay, thank you, Paulette. We're not going to touch on this, but fortunately, we have been or continue to be at sometimes ungrateful and evil ourselves. So, God is merciful with us. We can turn and be merciful to other people. But that's not the point I want to hit at. The point is 35. You will be, but there's a sense in which we are. We are sons and daughters of God now. This gets to the how part. Okay? That this doesn't necessarily make us, by loving other people, doesn't make us sons of God, sons and daughters of the Most High. We already are. And when we realize that we are sons and daughters of God, that our worth comes from Him and not ourselves, that puts a whole different spin on other people. And you say, how? Think about why it's often hard to love other people and to be in a relationship with people who don't give that back. It's oftentimes because our identity is found in how other people treat us and how other people view us. Is that correct? I mean, who we are is a lot based upon how other people treat us and how other people view us, whether it's our friends, our family, our neighbors, our coworkers. Who are you? A lot of that is made up by how we interact and how other people view us and treat us. So oftentimes when men have a much bigger problem with this than women, when a guy who's been in a CEO position retires and he loses that identity as a CEO, his life falls apart. He's lost his identity as this businessman. And it goes in all sorts of other different ways. But the issue is that when our identity is wrapped up in what other people view us as, it's a lot harder to love people because we don't get that back. Does that make sense? Is that making sense at all? Am I making sense there? The issue then is when our identity is in Christ, when our worth is in Him, as sons of the Most High, we can afford to be vulnerable in our love. Why? Because it's okay if that love isn't reciprocated, if it isn't given back to us. Because our worth is in God. It's not in the love that is given back to us. As painful as that might be, this love that we have with God, that He has with us, this identity, lets it be okay to love people who don't love us back. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to open ourselves up to the hurt that sometimes comes, because let's be honest, if we love people who don't love us back, that opens us up to a lot of hurt. It can, and it does. Whether it's situations with our families or at work, or it spans all different areas of life. When that happens, it's okay, because our worth isn't what other people view us as, or in, or for, but in how Christ views us. And then it's okay to love other people, as Jesus talked about here. And we all have social conventions. We all know how the world's supposed to operate. And that's what Jesus is getting at here, that the world knows that you're supposed to, when somebody does something good for you, you do something good for them. That's how it's supposed to operate. Jesus says if you do that, that's no different than how everybody else lives. What's that to you? I mean, that's what everybody else does. But when you do this, verse 27 through 36, when you begin to walk the way Jesus walks, it's different. We're not pulling Jesus anymore from the edges to the middle, taking Him from His radicalness and making Him more tolerable. We're not making Him more palatable, a little bit easier to follow, but we're leaving Jesus where He belongs, out on the edges, out where the radicals live. We're letting Jesus speak for Himself, and we're allowing our lives then to fall in step with His, instead of trying to pull Jesus to us.